Today we are going to talk about impact of Sangat, and the person who is giving that seminar is a gem of a person who got his training from the camps and from other retreats and other camps he has attended, and his name is Dr. Mohanpal Singh. Mohanpal Singh is going to speak on the impact of Sangat. Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji ki
Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa,
Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh.
As Uncle said, today I'm going to talk about the impact of Sangat, and have a lot to get through in the next hour, so I'll be moving fast, and hopefully I won't induce a seizure in any of you. But when we talk about Sangat, most of us think about a collection of Sikhs getting together. As we sit in Gurdwara or even here, you can refer to that as Sangat. But Sangat can also mean different things. It can also just mean the people that you surround yourself with, the people that you associate with on a regular basis. And we'll talk more about the definitions of Sangat and what Gurbani says about it in just a few minutes. But basically the purpose of this talk is going to be to analyze or maybe to think about how does Sangat impact our lives, both in our present day lives, how has it brought us to where we are as individuals, how has it impacted Sikh history, and where can it take us into the future. These are two pictures here from the 300th anniversary of the Khalsa in 1999 at Anand Prasad. And I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and to me, seeing this number of Sikhs, because I didn't have a lot of Sikhs where I grew up, it's amazing. It blows my mind when I see the number of Sikhs gathered here for a common cause. You can see some of these people, they're white people, black people, brown people, people of all races. There's even a guy here playing the bagpipes. And it's not the first time I've seen Sikh playing, or bagpipes being played at a Sikh event. But it's just a collection of unique people who are there celebrating what they have in common, their lifestyle, their way of life, Sikhi. And to me, when I look at this sort of thing, you just see a sea of people extending into the background of these pictures. And the imagery just reminds me of the number of cells we have in our body, each of them having a different specialized function. But when they come together and form an organism, the organism is capable of much more than what those individual cells are. And I think the same holds true for a Sikh Sangat, that as a collection, they can do much more than they can as individuals. And I think it nicely summarizes the statement that the whole is much greater than the sum of its parts. So as we go through this hour, I want you to just ask yourself some questions. Things to consider while I'm up here speaking, when you go to bed tonight, when you go back to work or school after this retreat is over. Just ask yourself some questions in your daily life. Can the Sangat I keep impact my life? And then once you come to a conclusion there, does the Sangat I keep actually impact my life on any level, whether big or small? In other words, how have my friends, family, colleagues impacted the way I think and act, both negatively and positively? I want you to think about, what are my goals in life? What do I hope to accomplish in this short time that I'm here on this earth? And how can Sangat play a role in achieving those goals? And I think once you've thought about how do the people around you impact your life, how does your Sangat impact you negatively and positively, and knowing where you want to be in 10, 20 years or at the end of your life, what are your goals in life, I think it's important to also ask yourself, is it worth surrounding myself with people who influence me negatively? And lastly, are there things that I can do to surround myself with people who have a positive influence on me? So just ask yourself these questions, contemplate them. And I think basically what I'm talking about here, asking these questions and getting you to have some insight on, is basically human behavior. what are the things that dictate our behavior? And I think anytime you consider that type of a question, you're going to get into the age-old debate of nature versus nurture. Are our behaviors determined by genetic influences, the nature, or purely by social interactions, the nurture part of it? And I think no matter what side of the fence you sit on, you have to admit that on some small level, at least, at the very least, you have to concede the fact that there's some element of nature and nurture in the way we behave, the way we act, no matter how small that may be. And here's a couple of examples of how nature and nurture make their way into our lives. We've all heard about the fight or flight response. We've learned about it in school. Animals have the ability, when they're faced with danger or a threat, to either stay and fight or they'll flee, both being a protective mechanism that they can either save their life or save others. And humans are no exception to that. When we're faced with a threat, there's a physiologic response that occurs. We get an adrenaline surge, our pupils dilate, our respiratory rate increases, our heart rate increases, our blood is diverted to our skeletal muscle so that we can have more energy to fight or flee from the impending danger. And I guess the thing that separates us, though, from our lower relatives, lower animal relatives, is the ability to reason. Our intellect separates us from lower animals, so we can actually think about things and logically overcome some of our natural impulses, but that doesn't change the fact that they occur. This fight or flight response occurs. It's encoded in our DNA to have this happen when we're faced with danger. And it's something that we can't control the occurrence of it, but we can certainly have some control over the outcome. And then as far as nature goes, or nurture goes, this is a young woman from an African tribe. She's a part of one of several African tribes who pierce their lips, and they insert a wooden disc into their lip. And she's part of a tribe, one of the tribes where they do this to brides-to-be. They actually do this right before they're married. They'll pierce their lip, they'll put in progressively larger discs, and they'll decorate it very ornately, and it's considered a sign of beauty. And the point I'm trying to make with this is that beauty is truly in the eye of the beholder. It's specific to geography. Obviously, many of us are looking at that and thinking, that looks weird, it doesn't look beautiful to me. Our ideals of fashion, of beauty, of what we find attractive are very much shaped by society, by other people around us. And so to this woman, in her society, in her Sangat, she would be considered a very beautiful woman. Beauty and things of the nurture category they're not just geographically isolated, they can also be specific to a point in time. What was considered beautiful 200 years ago in North America is not the same as what's considered beautiful today. I would propose that a majority of our ideals of beauty are influenced by nurture rather than nature. So just a couple of examples of how these things play into our lives and play into our behavior. And I'm going to talk a lot more about nature versus nurture, some of the sociology, the psychology, and the biology behind it in the latter half of this talk. But first I want to talk more about Gurbani and Sikhi. What did the Gurus tell us? This is a common Punjabi folk saying, Jasi Sangat, Dasi Rangat. And so literally it means however your Sangat is how you will also be colored. And to expand on that a little, the people we surround ourselves with impact the way we think and behave. And I would propose to you that there's a lot of truth in this. You may not believe it, but I think there is. And I'm going to try to show you some examples of that. And I think the Gurus very much preached a lot of their message on this ideal, that the people you surround yourself with will affect you. So then what is Sangat? Well, broadly defined, it can be your company, associations, gathering, congregation, the people you're with, people you surround yourself with. Now Gurbani takes it a step further and talks about Satsangat and Sad Sangat. Satsangat in Gurbani, according to the Gurus, is a congregation where only Nam is recited. So we're talking about a congregation of Sikhs or anybody where Gurbani Kirtan is being done. Only the Guru's word, truth, is being recited there. Sadh Sangat is similar, and it's a congregation or company of the Guru and or his Sevak. Sat Sangat meaning the true Sangat, where truth resides. Sadh Sangat meaning Sangat of a Sadhu. The true Sadhu is the Guru, or the Guru's Sevak, who acts as the Guru would by reciting Nam. The true Seva in our lives, according to Gurbani, is doing Nam, doing Kirtan. So the Sevak is the person who's doing that. Sat Sangat and Sadh Sangat are often used interchangeably in Gurbani. And then on the flip side, we have the word Kusangat, which in Gurbani means bad or negative company, association, or gathering. It's the opposite of Sat Sangat or Sadh Sangat. So using Sikhi philosophy, Gurbani, the Guru's message, this is a schematic that I'd like to go through. Take some time and actually go through this and show you how Gurbani outlines the path to Waheguru or the path away from Waheguru. And if we start with Sadh Sangat on the left there, that can implant an idea which becomes a thought. We think about it, we act on it, it becomes our habit. Habits are repeated actions. They say it takes 21 days, 3 weeks to form a habit after doing it repeatedly, day in, day out. That it comes to the point that you don't think about it, it's effortless. So 3 weeks isn't a lot of time, and I'm not saying that you can achieve God in 3 weeks, but certainly there's some truth in repeated action and the association with habit. It becomes your nature, and through a life of Gurmat, the Gurmukh can obtain Waheguru, become one with Waheguru. And the opposite is true with Kusangat, your bad or negative Sangat. They're going to go through the same process, but it's going to take you in the other direction. The Manmukh will lead a life of Manmat and enter or continue the cycle of transmigration of birth and death, which is the path away from Waheguru. So Guru Sahib has told us that we want to be the top dwellers. We want to stay up here, and we want to go towards Waheguru. We don't want to be the bottom dwellers down here. And I've taken single lines from Gurbani just to demonstrate all these concepts that are here. I haven't presented you with the whole Shabad, which is important to do whenever you're translating Gurbani, but I just wanted to quickly show you that there are numerous examples in Gurbani that demonstrate each of these aspects of this schematic. So I'd like to just go through that here. So starting with Sadh Sangat, Guru Sahib says, Sadh Sangat Sachkhand vich prem pagat parjaya hoye mela. When one becomes attached to the abode of the truth in the form of the Sangat, the Sadh Sangat, he through loving devotion meets the Lord. So right here, Guru Sahib is telling us, it's through Sadh Sangat that you'll meet Waheguru. This is the path to Waheguru. And he's saying it plain as day. Sadhu Sangat Nirmala Aapkare Pratpal. In the Sadh Sangat, one becomes pure and immaculate. The Lord himself takes care of that person who is Nirmala. So again, Guru Sahib is saying very plainly that Waheguru is going to take care of the person who has gained something from the Sadh Sangat. That Sadh Sangat has to be there. You have to have attached yourself to that in order to become one with Waheguru. From Sadh Sangat you can get the idea of what philosophy is, whether it's Gurbani, in this case for us. You get the idea in your head, you're presented with an idea from the Sadh Sangat. You think about that, you act upon it, and again, it becomes your habit through repeated actions. Now that's an active step. The repeated actions, that's very active. It's not something you just passively will obtain from other people. So I want to get across to you that I think this whole process, this schematic, is a very active one. It's something you do with uddam, with effort. You put into it, and you'll get something out of it. And how does Gurbani demonstrate this? There's a folk tale that talks about a sadhu who it was raining outside and he needed protection from the rain, and so this woman said, why don't you come into my home and until it stops raining? And so he did that, and then he found out that she was a prostitute. And they spoke, and when it was time for him to leave, he was very thankful that she had given him protection from the rain. And he said, well, I keep this parrot with me at all times, and it's one of the few possessions that I have, but I want you to have it. And so she accepted his gift, the gift of the sadhu. And what she didn't know, though, was that the sadhu, since he had all day, he just recited Ram Ram, he had taught that to the parrot as well. And the parrot also spoke Ram, Ram, Ram all day long. And what happened was when this prostitute took the parrot all day long was reciting the Lord's name. She soon began to think about it. She soon began to recite the Lord's name as well. It became her habit. The parrot became her Sangat. And the Simran became her Sad Sangat. And she began reciting and doing Simran all the time. And it became her habit as well. It became her nature. And she eventually saw the folly in her ways and led a better life after that. So this line of Gurbani is talking about this story that in which the greatness, the virtues of the Sangat, the sadhu in this case, were so great that he could teach an animal, the parrot, to do Simran, and that further, that is what saved the prostitute. That was the greatness of the Sangat, was that it had this effect on somebody else. Once it becomes our habit, it can become our nature. Once we're engrossed in doing something, once we think about it all the time, we become one with that ideal thought, action, whatever it is. It becomes a big part of us. We become a part of it. And that's when I think it becomes your nature. And Guru Sahib tells us about this example. Jo chandan nikat vise hird bapada tyon sat sangat mil patit parwan. The sandalwood tree is known to be very fragrant, and basically anything that grows near that tree will become just as fragrant. It'll take on the smell of that sandalwood tree. So Guru Sahib here is saying that the castor oil plant grows near the sandalwood tree, and it becomes very, very fragrant, just like the sandalwood tree. Its nature becomes like that of the sandalwood tree. And Guru Sahib is saying the same way, a sinner, a pandit, associating with Sat Sangat can become acceptable and approved, can basically take on the nature of that Sat Sangat and bring those characteristics to life within themselves. Once it's your nature, you live a life of Gurmukh, you become a Gurmukh, and that's the path to Waheguru. That's the way to attach yourself to Waheguru. Guru Sahib says, Mil Sangat Har Rang Paya Jan Nanak Mantan Rang. By joining the Sangat, Nanak has said that the mind and body become completely imbued with the love of Waheguru. So again, talking about the Sangat is the first step. By joining the Sangat, this happens. Your mind becomes completely engrossed in Waheguru. Now the flip side, those are for the top dwellers. Now we talk about the bottom dwellers here, which Guru Sahib said doesn't want us to be. He doesn't want us to be in the bottom half of this schematic. So we talk about the Sangat, the negative Sangat. Kaam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Abhiman, Dikhai Ras, in Sangat te tu rode. Guru Sahib is saying sexual desire, anger, greed, attachment, egotism, corrupt pleasures. He's saying stay away from these. Don't even go near them. How do you not go near them? Well, you stay away from people who embody these characteristics. Kaam, Krodh, Sangat, Durjan ki tate anis pago. Lust, anger, and the company of evil people. He says run away from them day and night. Anis pago. It's not just, this isn't all smiles and flowers. The way he's talking here, these lines are very powerful. They're very, very visual, saying, he's warning us. He's saying, run away from them day and night. He's giving us a warning. And he's saying, these things are so bad, you shouldn't just walk away or skip away. Run away. It's almost a sense of urgency that our lives are running out and we're not doing this. So Guru Sahib is using very strong words here and clearly telling us to stay away from these characteristics and people who embody these characteristics. And Guru Sahib is not just talking about pedophiles and mass murderers. He's talking about manmukhs, manmat, anything that takes you away from Waheguru is something that you should stay away from. With Kusangat, the same thing happens with Sad Sangat, which is that they present an idea, it becomes your thoughts, your beliefs, your actions, your nature. And ultimately, you lead a life of manmat, bagla ka neech ki sangat, jaye karan dikhu mukhlaiya. The bagla is a stork, and the kag is the crow, and these are two birds who are known to feed on the dead carcass of other animals. And Guru Sahib again is using very vile and very graphic imagery to get his point across. And he's saying that associating with Kusangat, people who are wretched and lowly, is like how the stork and the crow feed on a dead carcass. And so you can see the imagery that Guru Sahib is trying to use here. It's poison for your body, it's poison for your mind, is what Guru Sahib is saying. And very, very powerful words. Ultimately, living a life of manmat is away from Waheguru. You become a manmukh, and you stay in this process of transmigration, of birth and death. Guru Sahib says over and over throughout Gurbani that without obtaining the Sad Sangat, without embodying these virtues into your own life, into your mind, that you're destined to continue the cycle of birth and death and not be saved, not be able to attach yourself with Waheguru. Sad Sangat syon sangana kiya, ojoni dukh pave. Whoever does not join the Sad Sangat suffers in terrible pain through countless incarnations. So Guru Sahib says this over and over and over. You can find lines like this all over Gurbani. It appears hundreds of times. And again, it's saying whoever does not join the Sad Sangat. So again, this is an active process, one that we all have to make efforts towards, joining the Sad Sangat. And otherwise, we will suffer the same consequences that everyone else will who doesn't join the Sad Sangat. Nach vidya nidan nigamang, nach gunege naam kirtana, nach rag ratham kantham, na chanchal chatar chatra, pag udam labdyam maya, nanik sad sang khal pandita. Just to summarize quickly, Guru Sahib here is saying, talking about all the virtues that he doesn't possess. He doesn't have wisdom of the Vedas, does not have merits or praises of Nam, does not have a beautiful voice, is not clever or wise. Maya can be attained by hard work, so it's not something that comes from us either. But Guru Nanak says, Sad Sang Khal Pandita. Khal means a donkey, and Guru Sahib is referring in this case to a very stupid person, a fool, basically, and saying that Khal Pandita, that with the Sad Sangat, even a donkey or a fool, a very stupid person, can become a pandit, a great religious scholar. So he's using very, very high praise for the power of Sad Sangat, the impact of what Sad Sangat can do for even the stupidest person. Just switching here to how did this affect our history? How can we pull out examples from our history? And I pulled some common examples. I think most of us have heard these stories, we're familiar with these stories, but I just want to show how some of these are impacted by Sangat. How do they relate to the kind of Sangat we keep? Well, Bhai Lana Ji became a Sikh and ultimately became Guru Angad Dev Ji. He was actually a devout Hindu who worshipped Durga, and he would lead his fellow villagers in prayer, in worshipping, doing puja of Durga. And every year he would organize a pilgrimage to Jwalamukhi, which is a temple dedicated to Mata Durga, the Hindu goddess. And one day he heard, before he went on his pilgrimage, he heard Bhai Jodh singing a shabad. And he asked him about it. He said, "What are you singing?" And Bhai Jodh replied, "I'm singing the Bani of Nanak." and he explained what he was saying, what he was singing. And Lanaji was so intrigued and so interested in what he had heard that he decided the next time he was going to go to his pilgrimage to Jawalamukhi, he was going to visit Nanak. And he found out he was going to be in Kartarpur. So he decided, well, that's on the way to Jawalamukhi, so we'll just stop there for a little while. I want to meet with Nanak and hear what he has to say. And so he did this. And on his way, he stopped in Kartarpur, and he met with Guru Nanak, and he was humbled by the experience. And he was engrossed with the Bani, with the message of the Guru. And it's said that he didn't complete the pilgrimage. From then on, he became a Sikh. And as they say, the rest is history. We know that within 7 years of meeting Guru Nanak passed the jot on to Bhai Lanaji as Guru Angad. And so this is an example of somebody who was discontent with his current Sangat. He wasn't getting what he wanted out of his puja to Durga and his current Sangat. So he actively sought out not Guru Nanak at that time. It was a very active process. He decided, I want to go meet Guru Nanak. And he did. And he was changed. And it changed the entire course of history. Fast forward to 1704. During Guru Gobind Singh's time, when Anandpur Sahib had been taken by Mughal forces, Guru Gobind Singh with 46 retreated to basically a mud fort, a mud hut. It's not very big, called Chamkaur. And they were followed there by 200,000 Mughal forces. And I don't know if you can imagine, I can't even fathom what it would be like where there's 40 of you with 200,000 people chasing after you, wanting your head, wanting you dead. And that was the goal, to kill them, not to capture them. And that's a relative strength of 5,000 to 1, basically. And when they got to Chamkaur, the Sikhs were able to hold the Mughal forces off for about 2 or 3 hours of daylight that were left during the day. And as was custom at that time, the Mughal army did not attack at night. So that worked in the favor of the Sikhs. They were able to hold them off for a couple hours till nighttime fell. During the nighttime, Guru Sahib was able to create confusion amongst the Mughal forces. Often during the night, the Mughal forces would be fighting themselves because they thought they were being attacked by Sikhs. And they were completely confused. And in that time, Guru Sahib was able to escape, as well as 3 other Sikhs. But most of the 40 died. And by the next morning, it's estimated that 1 million Mughal forces were now there, had arrived. But Guru Sahib was gone by that time. And they went in first daylight, and they killed the rest of the Sikhs who were remaining in the fort. But the point of this is, Guru Sahib, Guru Gobind Singh described a Sikh as being able to fight 125,000 of his enemy. Savalak. That later in the post-Guru period became known as Savalak Fauj, an army of 125,000. And the Sikhs would call each individual Sikh as Savalak Fauj, and that had 2 purposes. One was to confuse the enemy, because then the enemy wouldn't really know how many Sikhs were coming, how many were there. And the other purpose was, this was how they remained in high spirits. This is how they created a sense of camaraderie. And you think about it, when 200,000 forces are hunting 40, the state of mind you'd have to be in to go out as individuals, like the 2 older Sahibzade did, go out and fight the Mughal forces 1 at a time or 2 at a time, is incredible. You have to be in a state of mind that's beyond, I think, what most of us in this room can imagine. And the way that state of mind was created was they were with Sadh Sangat. They had Sadh Sangat. They had Guru Gobind Singh with them. They were doing Kirtan. They were doing Path Bani. And they were able to keep their spirits up and, against all odds, accomplish something so great, which was to keep the Guru alive. And they accomplished that goal. After Guru Gobind Singh's time in 1716, Banda Singh Bahadur had been captured by the Mughal forces. At that time, it was Farooq Sayer was the emperor, and he not only caught Banda Singh Bahadur but his whole army, and they paraded them, humiliating them till they got to Delhi in chains, blackened faces, sitting on donkeys wearing dunce caps. And by the time they reached Delhi, there were 700 Sikhs that had been captured. The rest were killed and their heads were put on spears. And when they got to Delhi, it was ordered that 100 Sikhs would die a day. Every day, 100 Sikhs would be beheaded, unless they renounced Sikhi. If they renounced Sikhi, they would not be killed. That's what they were told. And a Sikh woman, she was so afraid of losing her son, who had been caught by the Mughal forces, that she pleaded with the emperor's court. She went to the court and she said, she lied. She said, my son is not a Sikh. He was captured by the Sikhs, and you guys have mistakenly kept him imprisoned as a Sikh. Please don't kill him. He's my only source of income, and we're not even Sikhs. And the emperor wrote her a pardon and said, take this to where they're being executed. And so she took it to where all the Sikhs were being executed, and she presented the pardon. And this young man, his name was Hakikat Singh, a young man of 18. And they asked him, they said, is this true? Is this woman speaking the truth that you're her son? He said, yes, I'm her son. They said, are you a Sikh? He said, yes, I'm a Sikh. She's lying, and I'm a Sikh. I'm not going to renounce my religion. I'm not going to renounce my guru. And he asked they used to call the executioner the Mukta, or the deliverer, because they considered him the deliverer, that he was going to deliver them to Waheguru. This was their state of mind. And he said, no, you have to cut off my head now. I'm not going to renounce Sikhi. And instead, he renounced his mother as a liar and someone who was not a Sikh. And he put his head on the chopping block, and it was removed. And I think, again, just to be in that state of mind where you're seeing 100 of your friends, family, being murdered, beheaded every day in front of your eyes, and to have that kind of resolve, I think Sangat plays an incredible role in this. And the Sangat they must have had amongst themselves, having gone to battle together, having their kirtan together, Path, Bani, Nitnem, Simran, it created tremendous strength within these Sikhs. And that's why their stories are being told today. We all know about Sajjan Tug. He would call himself a sheikh or a holy man, and he had an inn where Hindus and Muslims would stay, and he had a place for Hindus to worship and Muslims to worship. But at night, he would rob them and kill them and throw their bodies into a well. And one day he came across two men who came to his inn asking for a room, Guru Nanak and Bhai Mardana. And they asked for a place to stay, and he said, of course, stay here. And when nightfall came, he and his men were planning on killing the Guru and stealing his possessions. And at that time, as Guru Nanak was getting ready to go to bed, he is said to have sung this shabad, Sajjan se naal main chaldiyan naal chalan, jithe lekha mangiya tithe khade disan. And Sajjan Tug heard this shabad being sung, and it said that he was so moved by the Bani, so moved by the message that he was hearing, that he went to Guru Sahib in tears. And he said he admitted all the things that he had been doing, what he was planning on doing, and he changed his ways right then and there. He was so moved by the Sangat of the Guru, by the Gurbani that he got. And I think this, again, is just a great example of how the Sangat at the right time, or at any time, but in this particular case, it happened very quickly, that it can impact you in ways that you can't believe. And from that point on, he became a very devout Sikh, and he's given credit for opening basically the first Gurdwara. At that time they called him Dharamsal or Dharamsala, and that was the first Gurdwara that was open, and it was run by Sajjan Tug, who remained a Sikh for the rest of his life. Of course, he dropped the Tug part of it, I think, after that. We've all heard the saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans. And what does it mean? It means when you're somewhere with a certain group of people or in a certain social situation, you do as they are doing. You do things to fit in. It's always easier to do things to fit in when you know everyone else is doing it. However, this way of thinking was rejected by the gurus. And it's exemplified by the story of Guru Nanak at Hardwar, where he went to the Ganges to take a bath, and he saw people throwing water to the west, or I'm sorry, to the east, and they were throwing water to the souls of their dead ancestors, who they believed resided where the sun rose. And Guru Nanak went in the water, and he started throwing water to the west. And everybody looked at him, and he said, "Are you crazy, you silly man? What are you doing?" He said, "Well, my fields in Punjab are very dry. They don't have enough water. They're dying. So I thought I would just throw water to water my fields." And they all laughed at him, and they said, "How can that be?" And he said, "Your fields are so far away. How could the water possibly reach?" And then he in turn said, "Well, my fields are much closer than where you think your ancestors are. And so how do you think that throwing water to your ancestors is reaching them? How is it reaching their souls?" And many people got the point. And it was that this practice of empty ritualism that everybody just did because everyone else was doing, they had no reason to do this. There was no good reason why they should do this. They were just doing it because everyone else was doing it. And many of the people there that day got the message that you don't do in Rome as the Romans. The Gurus did not live their lives that way. Just to wrap up with the Gurbani and Sikh history part of this, here's another photo of Anandpur Sahib 1999. You can just see the sea of Sangat sitting there. And Kabirji says, "Kabir man pankhi payo udu udda dis jaye, jo jaisi Sangat mila sota so phal khaye." Kabirji compares our minds to a bird. He says the bird can fly in 10 different directions, and wherever the bird goes, it's going to find other birds and eat whatever fruits those birds are eating. And Kabirji says our mind is the same way. If we let it wander, if we let it go in different directions, it's going to eat the fruits of whatever it encounters, of whoever it encounters. We're going to take on those values. Our mind is going to become imprinted upon by those who we're surrounded by. And so I see this as a warning that Sangat is great, but choose your Sangat wisely. And then, not only that, to take it a step further, when you're in Sad Sangat, when you've gotten the fruits of the true Sangat, it doesn't end there. It doesn't just end at this congregation. Once this congregation is over, everybody's going to go back to their lives. Once this retreat is over, we're going to go back to school, to work. But we have to take something with us. And that's where we talked about earlier. It's got to become our thoughts, our actions, our habits, our nature. And only then can we live the life of a Gurmukh if we let other Gurmukhs in the Sad Sangat imprint upon us those good qualities. So switching gears here now, I promised you we'd go back to this idea of nature versus nurture. So I want to talk a little bit about sociology, psychology, and neurobiology, and how does it relate to the idea of Sangat and being influenced by other people. This is not just a rock, this is a pet rock. And in 1975, a man by the name of Gary Dahl, he was drunk at a bar, and he had the idea that I'm going to sell rocks to people. He said to himself, I think people are so stupid that they're going to buy a rock from me. And that's exactly what happened. He sold it for $3.95. It was marketed beautifully. It came with a carrying case, a nest, and a pamphlet on how to care for that rock. And within a year, he was a multi-millionaire. And this scenario here is still used today for marketing and psychology to show people how influenced consumers are by the way something is marketed. This was a case where a few people became interested in this, they started buying it, but it became a craze. And it became to the point that people basically were thinking, I have to have one because someone else has one. And I think this nicely demonstrates how other people can influence our choices as consumers. And it's used today as a case study in many marketing with people who work in marketing. And part of part of trying to understand that concept or how we're influenced by consumers or other people can affect our consumerism or even other aspects of our life is partially explained by one theory called the social cognitive theory. And it's an approach to understanding human behavior. It's of course not the do-all and end-all of understanding human behavior, but the main tenets are that there are response consequences that influence the likelihood, basically outcomes that influence the likelihood that an individual will perform a particular behavior in a given situation. It is based on the understanding that humans learn by observing others and participating in those actions, and that individuals are most likely to model behavior observed by others that they identify with. If I'm a 5-foot-tall white guy from Alabama, I'm more likely to associate with another 5-foot-tall white guy from Alabama than someone who is very different than myself. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. The purpose of the theory is to understand and predict individual and group behavior, as well as to identify methods in which behavior can be modified. This theory has been used as interventions for drug rehab, Alcohol Anonymous, other things like behavior pathology, health promotion. It's been used in a lot of ways. Different aspects of this theory have been used in a lot of ways to help not only understand human behavior, but also how to change human behavior. The degree to which a behavior is seen to result in a valued outcome, which are our expectancies, will influence the likelihood that one will adopt a model behavior, the motivational process. We are motivated by outcomes. We like what we see, we like what happened when this person did that. We like that outcome. So we're more likely to participate in that if we like that outcome. That becomes our motivational force. And I'm sure many of you have seen this movie, Mean Girls. It's a very funny movie, and I highly recommend it. But in one of the scenes, one of the girls cuts the other girl's shirt in a particular way to embarrass her. It's the most popular girl in the school, and she cuts her shirt in a way to humiliate and embarrass her and to make her look bad. And what ends up happening is because she's so popular and she's wearing this shirt that's cut in a particular way, all the other girls in the school want to be popular, so the next day they all wear their shirts cut that way. And it's a ridiculous scenario, but it just shows there's some truth in that. We do things because we want to often be like certain people. And people use that in marketing all the time. We've all seen the Nasonex commercials with the bumblebee flying around. Well, the voice of that bumblebee is Antonio Banderas. And companies do this on purpose. They use celebrity voices, even though you never see the celebrity. They use their voices because in our brains, in our minds, we associate that voice with beauty, glamour, fame, money. And even though they never say that this is Antonio Banderas' voice, we hear it and we automatically have some positive affiliation with that voice, and we connect it to the Nasonex drug. And that's how a lot of how marketing works. It's all based on psychology. And it's used in a lot of other ways too. This was a community incentive program done by a very small county in Montana where they studied behavioral risk factors. And they took high school students, 8th to 12th grade, over a 4-year period, and they asked those students to think of how many of their best friends have done the following in the past 12 months. And they asked them, have their friends smoked cigarettes, tried alcohol, used marijuana or other drugs, been suspended from school, carried a handgun, sold illegal drugs, stolen or tried to steal a motor vehicle, been arrested or dropped out of school. And what they found wasn't surprising, but it was certainly an eye-opener in the sense that it's worrisome. The conclusions were that young people who associate with peers who engage in problem behavior are more likely to engage in that behavior themselves. And it makes sense. I don't think anyone in this room would really argue with that. It makes sense that if our friends are doing something, we're probably more likely to do it. And this applied to children who are from well-managed families who lacked other risk factors that make them do things. These were families that were well-to-do, 2 parents, whatever. But if their friends were into these bad things, negative behaviors, they were much more likely to engage in those behaviors, and it was the most consistent predictor of negative behavior in these children. In 2000, the American Journal of Public Health published a study that said having close friends who drink or smoke is a risk factor for such behavior. Again, this isn't profound information here. I think most of us would accept that on some level or another. Having a friend who has attempted suicide was a strong risk factor for a young person's own risk of committing suicide. Positive family relationships were a protective factor against weapon-related violence, alcohol use, suicide, and sexual intercourse. So what's the point here? Well, this comes back to Jasi Sangat, Dasi Rangat. The people who you surround yourself with are more likely to influence you in whatever way, whatever behaviors they're doing, they're partaking in. And that's why I think this last line was so important. The Sangat of the family was very important in being protective against these negative behaviors, even if they had peers and friends who were participating in those behaviors. So why do we conform? Why is it that human beings are so prone to take on the characteristics of those that we surround ourselves with? Why do people want to conform? There was a study done on World War II, on Germans during World War II, during Hitler's regime, which asked that question. Why did so many Germans just follow Hitler and not speak up, even though they may have felt that it was wrong what he was doing? They didn't like it. It didn't sit well with them. But so many Germans followed suit against the Jews and didn't stand up against Hitler. And so there's a physician named Dr. Gregory Burns at Emory. He's a world-renowned neurobiologist who has done a modification on that study. What he did was he used MRI to image the brain and look at areas. He presented people with a visual stimulus, and then he asked them questions based on that visual stimulus. And there was a right and a wrong answer based on that stimulus. And he looked at which areas of the brain are active during that decision-making process. And what he found that, okay, when people were making that decision, there were certain areas of the brain that were active. But what he also found was, part of the study was before the subject would read their answers out loud, he would have other people who were in on the study intentionally get up and read the wrong answers as if they were the right answers. And the subject would then get up and change their answers. Even though they knew what was right, they were afraid to go against the group. So they actually changed their answers to the wrong answer. And what he found was, when he did this, that there were increased signals in the amygdala. And that's the fear center of our brain. We actually, as human beings, we have relatively small amygdalas. And some very primitive animals actually have very large amygdalas compared to the rest of their brain, like crocodiles, who are very ancient animals and probably motivated more by fear in their behavior than human beings are. But we can still see that it's there. People would change their answers to the wrong answer. Even when their eyes are telling them one thing, they were afraid to go against the group and they would change their answers. So he concluded from this study that if enough people tell you something, you can start to believe it even though your eyes tell you something else. These people are very susceptible to social influences. There is fear of going against the crowd and standing alone. And I think at some point or another, I'm sure we've all felt that in our lives, where we felt like we should do something different than what the other people were doing, but we were afraid to do that. We were afraid to stand up and say, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do it differently. This is Alan Funt. He was the host of Candid Camera, which originally aired in the 50s, and he did a great, excuse me, he did a great prank, which I want to show you the video of. It's just a 2-minute video, very short.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently another member of our staff will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality. Little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups. Here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, they'll open the door. Everybody's changed positions. Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
Jesse, Sangat, Bessie, and I think this just nicely demonstrates the power that other people or your Sangat can have over you. They definitely do influence our behavior, whether it's something small like that or even on a greater scale. But I really enjoyed that video. So let's talk a little bit about biology. I don't have too much left, but just a few slides on how biology may even play a role in dictating our behavior as far as it pertains to Sangat, to people we surround ourselves with. We're told through evolution that we came from lower primates and that this could be one of our relatives. I think there's some truth in that. You can see the similarities here. But sometimes the lines get a little blurred. And we kind of wonder, have we really evolved that much more than some of our lower primate ancestors? And because the monkey on the left, to me, looks very similar to the monkey on the right. So we've all heard of the saying, monkey see, monkey do. Well, there's an award-winning book which talks about that very concept. It's called Caps for Sale. It's a children's book. And in this book, there's a mischievous band of monkeys who steal the hats off of a hat peddler while he sleeps. And he gets very angry, and he tries to get all the hats back, and he can't get them from the monkeys. And in frustration, in the end, he takes his remaining hat, and he takes it off, and he throws it on the ground. And all of the monkeys do the same. They mimic him. And they throw all their hats on the ground, and then he's able to collect them up and take them back. But I think there's definitely a lot of truth in that, and I think we have to think about, where does that come from? We know that some of our lower primate ancestors tend to mimic what they see. And so scientists try to figure out, well, why is that? What is it about brains that are causing this? And what they found that we actually have neurons in our brain. Those are the main brain cells that perform the primary functions in our brain that are called mirror neurons. And what they found was they took monkeys and they said, okay, when a monkey performs a certain task, they identified which neurons in the brain were firing, which ones were active during that activity. Then they sedated the monkey, but they were able to see another monkey performing the same task. And what they found was when a monkey observed another monkey performing a task, just observing, a lot of those same neurons would fire in their brain. And this gave rise to the concept of mirror neurons. And it's the idea that we have neurons in our brain that when we simply watch somebody else or another of our kind doing something, those neurons are firing, they're forming connections, and we're actually forming habits in our brains, we're forming connections in our brains that we otherwise would not have formed just by watching someone do something. So on a biological level, certainly the things that we see, the things we see people do affect us. They actually change the structure in our brains. And in humanoids, it was actually thought that ours are more advanced than in lower primates, and that this actually helped us in language, art, music, tool making, emotions, things that separate us from some of the lower primates. And they believe that about 50,000 years ago. Point being, our brains are hardwired to not only accept outside influences, but to change our behavior based on what we see. We mimic other things, and this was important to get to where we are as a civilization, as a species. But it also has negative consequences. When you see something negative, that imprints on your brain the same way. And so you might be saying, well, if our brains are hardwired to follow people and to mimic their behaviors, and if the fear centers in our brain make us conform to those around us, and all the psychosocial theories say that we want to be like other people, we want to fit in with our peers and do what they're doing, then do we really have a choice? Are we just set up, basically, to do whatever other people are doing? And I think that way of thinking is wrong. We certainly biologically have evolved to have these functions in our brain which dictate our behavior and have brought us to where we are as a species. But we also have intellect and reasoning. We can overcome impulses to do negative things. We can reason with other people. We can reason with ourselves and realize what is the outcome of a particular negative behavior or a particular positive behavior. And so that's what separates us from other primates. Just in conclusion, to wrap up here, I have two small case studies, very quick and short, which I think demonstrate some of the concepts I've been talking about. Why do so many Sikhs try alcohol in college? I think all of us here know that a high number of Sikhs, when they go off to college, they at least try alcohol once. Some of them go even further. One college student was asked, a young Sikh, and the response was very simple. They are surrounded by it constantly, and they just want to fit in. And again, they're surrounded by it constantly. Their Sangat is people who drink alcohol, something that to a Sikh is an unethical behavior. They just want to fit in. That's human nature. We definitely want to fit in. And so I think this demonstrates nicely the concept of Jasi Sangat, Kasi Rangat. On the flip side, a group of Detroit Sikhs spent the day performing some volunteer work, and when asked afterwards if they would have made the effort to do it on their own, all of them replied that they wouldn't have. And so again, this comes back to the notion of not only Jasi Sangat, Kasi Rangat, but as a community coming together, we can do more than we can individually. The whole is much greater than the sum of its parts. And we can do great things if we come together as a Sangat, great things as far as Sikhi is concerned, and great things for ourselves. So in conclusion, I would propose that we are influenced by the people around us, whether we realize it or not. A lot of it is on a subconscious level that we may not realize. Jasi Sangat, Dasi Rangat, to me rings very true, very loud and very true. And I think we can see it, if we look carefully, we can see it everywhere. The people we surround ourselves with on a regular basis have a major impact on the way we think and behave. Guru Sahib has condemned behavior which is adopted solely to fit in. Only through the Guru can we come closer to Waheguru. Guru Sahib is the medium through which we can meet Waheguru. And a Sikh really must enjoy the company of other Sikhs, have Sangat in their lives in order to come closer to the Guru. Have Sad Sangat, Sat Sangat. And not only must you have that, you have to seek it out. It's an active process to look for Sad Sangat. And it's something that we have to put in effort to incorporate into our lives. Here's my references. And just one last slide here that I'll conclude with. These are two pictures. The one on the left is somewhere in the late 1800s, early 1900s, of the Sikh Sangat sitting at Harmandir Sahib. And on the right here, this was taken in 1903 in Amritsar, a group of school children sitting by the Sarovar. And I think, to me, these are very powerful pictures. It shows our Sangat in full swoop. This is a very difficult thing to find these days. This many children keeping their identity, keeping their way of life. And I think for me, these are not only images of the past, but this can be a glimpse into the future if we all come together and as a Sangat do great things that I think we were destined to do, that we have the capability of doing. And I think that can be the impact of Sangat, not only in our individual lives, but in our families, in our communities, in our gurdwaras, and as a nation, and as a whole, as a Sikh nation, and even as members of the human species, we can have a very big impact on the world, and we can do it through Sangat. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.